Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. In this video, I'm going to explore the topic of Deontay Wilder ditching Dibella, his longtime promoter who is now on the outer after organising a meeting with DAZN chairman John Skipper in 2019, and I'll get to what Dibella is saying more broadly. But first, just a little caveat here. I'd like everyone just to, before wading into the comments, just wait to hear both sides of the argument, because I'm going to sort of do a devil's advocate on what Dibella is saying and then go on to the other side of the coin, which is sort of looking at why Deontay Wilder was never going to go into a DAZN deal despite Dibella's, having his best interest at heart. So we'll crack into it. So buckle in. Let's go. So Dibella not working with Deontay Wilder anymore, and the reason was that he set up the meeting with DAZN in 2019. He was trying to help broker a deal between Wilder and Anthony Joshua for an undisputed fight. And because of that, as Dibella says, he was cut loose, and he's described the situation as perverse, given, as he puts it, it's up to a promoter to seek out the best deals for their clients. He feels he was looking out for Deontay Wilder's best interest. He doesn't have any sort of ill will towards Wilder, and he says he would say hello, and he doesn't think Wilder would have a bad word to say about him. And there are a few ways to look at this, depending on where you sit in the boxing fandom, because that will ultimately probably, influence your position on this. Some will say that Dibella deserves to have been sacked, and others will say it's an act of total pettiness from Wilder. And he has been accused of being petty before, and the most recent instance has come from Paulie Malignaggi. He's claimed that he's been banned from Wilder Fury 2 events because he voiced his opinion that Fury won the first fight. And Wilder himself has spoken before about the Showtime commentary from the first fight, saying that it was biased against him. So I'll leave that to you to decide what you think, but my own personal view is Malignaggi was just calling what he saw on the night. And the fact that Wilder doesn't like it, well, that's over to Deontay Wilder. And if it's true that Malignaggi has been banned from events in the lead up to this rematch, it does, it's a poor look for Wilder and the PBC, because you can effectively say that they're trying to, or they are, censuring a member of the broadcast media. And you might say, well, Malignaggi, he's just a colour commentator, but he is a broadcast media professional. He calls the fights. But back to the matter at hand. There are a few things about this Dibella situation, what it reveals and what it reinforces, but I want to play the devil's advocate against what Dibella was saying. So even though he was the promoter of record, for recent Deontay Wilder fights, he wasn't exactly directing traffic for Wilder's career. That has clearly been managed by his advisor Al Heyman, co-manager Shelley Finkel, and also his other co-manager Jay Dees. So Dibella, while part of the broader setup, he was really coming in to promote the events. He wasn't really sort of directing Wilder's career. He was the guy that was the promoter contracted by PBC to put on the show. After all, we were always hearing how Wilder and other PBC fighters are promotional free agents, network free agents, but obviously they need someone to promote their fights when the fights are actually made. So that's Dibella's job. Come in, do the event. So what Dibella did could be seen as overstepping and overreaching his station in the hierarchy of things connected with Wilder's career. As it was, he was the one who reached out to DAZN and brokered the meeting with DAZN's John Skipper, and seemingly without the okay of anyone else involved in the Wilder or PBC apparatus. And given he did that amid the media storm of speculation that was swirling for an undisputed fight, it would have blindsided those involved, and because details of a proposed meeting were reported so quickly, it clearly put everyone involved in a position where they felt they needed to meet with DAZN, perhaps because of the optics, just because there would be blowback otherwise and speculation of disconnectedness within the broader Wilder and PBC apparatus, which I guess, we're kind of talking about now to some extent. Dibella's actions, given some of what I've just outlined, they could be seen as a breach of trust too. Despite his intentions, if he's not operating on the same page, he's not singing from the same song sheet, how could he be kept on? You can make that case. So that effectively was my argument to support the move to cut him loose. That's the way that they could be looking at this thing, and I'm sure some of it does actually factor into it. So that's the prudent part of my video title. We should move on to the other part, which you might be able to loosely describe as the petty. I think we can make a strong argument to say that Wilder and PBC never had any intention of working with DAZN. As DAZN chairman at the time, John Skipper, previously described, he sat down with everyone, he walked them through the proposed deal, 2 fights for Joshua, $100 million, or tack on Brazil, put that first, that's another $20 million, so $120 million for 3 fights. He says they listened, then they left. There was never any negotiating or a counter offer, nothing at all after the meeting. So clearly the meeting was held for appearances. And that's because they never had any intention of farming Deontay Wilder out to DAZN for 2 or 3 fights. Remembering, Deontay Wilder is one of the biggest names at PBC, and Al Haymon has a lot of money, and it's mostly other people's money, tied up in building premier boxing champions and its brand. From a business perspective, it makes 0 sense for Haymon to let Wilder walk, especially as he's entering a phase of his career where the time, effort, and development is just paying off now, with much bigger money now being made off his name as compared to just a couple of years ago. For Wilder personally, it's certainly debatable if it's the best business move financially, turning down a guaranteed money, mind you, of $120 million. But what's been reinforced, despite the talk of PBC fighters being promotional and network free agents, is they aren't going anywhere if Al Haymon doesn't want them to. It's about this time that some will raise the name Andy Ruiz Jr. and him being allowed to go off and fight Anthony Joshua, but clearly a very poor example. At the time that fight happened, Ruiz was new to PBC, having recently just signed. He wasn't a big name, he was expendable. A title shot, it was all upside, millions of dollars, title shot, and Haymon takes his cut. If Ruiz was an established star at PBC, chances are he wouldn't have been made available, like how the offer to Luis Ortiz fell through. And despite Ortiz begging Joshua to resend an offer once he realized that his team had turned down the fight because of money, I believe the more likely reason was that didn't come off was Ortiz was being preserved for Deontay Wilder. And that proved out just a few months later with the Wilder-Ortiz rematch happening in November 2019. But if you haven't been paying attention in recent years to what's been going on, the boxing politics, Al Haymon and PBC move at their own pace, for their own purposes and their own interests. We've seen it with the litany of in-house fights. And don't get me wrong, some of them have been great fights in the past year or two. We've had some great PBC fights. But don't expect them to be farming out their established names elsewhere. And for that reason, Wilder to DAZN was effectively dead on arrival from the start. And people will probably want to point out, well, PBC is working with ESPN for the Fury rematch. And that is true. But look at the reasons why. 1, they still get a big piece of the pie and keep their broadcast partner, Fox, happy with the dual pay-per-view platform. Fox probably wanted it outright, but they're not going to turn it down. And 2, they really had nowhere else to go but Fury after Luis Ortiz. It's unlikely many boxing fans would have put up with Wilder rolling straight into another in-house fight with the likes of Adam Kovnarski. Fury represents a big piece of the puzzle for Wilder's overall legacy. At 34, he needs to be adding meaningful names to his resume now to build that legacy, but also build his earning and star power, both of which are needed to be cashed in by the PBC now while he's still in his prime. And with a lot of miles on the clock, with 40 plus fights, 40 plus training camps, in addition to the injury history, they need to be cashing in on Wilder now. And they want to cash in with their own broadcast partners, not DAZN. Sure, they may make a Joshua and Wilder fight eventually, but you can bet it will be on terms that generate the money and prestige that benefits PBC and its partners. They will be well looked after. Boxing is a business after all, and often we do forget that. And with $500 million of money tied up in the PBC, they are going to make moves that look after themselves. It's just a fact. It runs counter to Dibella's notion that he's looking out for the best interests of his client. But ultimately, it's not about the fighter to a large extent. They are a commodity to be used to make money. We're seeing more and more of that in this day and age of promoter/broadcaster silos. We've got 3 distinct silos, and I'm not going to go into that, but Lou obviously didn't get the message and for that reason, he's gone. It may seem petty to cut him loose for looking out for Wilder, but it's a cutthroat business, and they couldn't have him going against the grain by the look of it. No matter what Wilder says about being in control of his own career, that's highly doubtful, and it's obvious he is a pawn being moved around the board by PBC at this point, and he always has been. Some people won't like to hear that, but they are looking out for themselves at PBC. It's a business after all. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.